This is our third Q&A with Dr. Stanton Peele. First, Stanton, thanks for joining me once again.
Always glad to ask questions from our enthusiastic fans.
All right, I haven't scared you away yet. You keep showing up. This time, I took a question from, there are 5 of them. I took one from each respective social media source. So email, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn.
And that's interesting variety we've got out there.
Yeah, although they all, well, I'll just start them. One of them I sent you recently, and you had generated a written response to it, but I wonder if you could take this on now. Someone asked, what do you think is the opposite of a value? And as someone who has recently read our section in our program, which is the second module about values. So he's asking, what's the opposite of a value? And why does there not seem to be a way to articulate it in English? Why is there no word for whatever the opposite of a value is?
Well, I view things as a range of values. I mean, I guess one question you could ask is, are there any human beings totally without values? And it's hard for me to conceive of that. For example, somebody might say Donald Trump doesn't have values, but that's not exactly true. Donald Trump values extravagant displays, economic success. He values himself and people who worship him. So he doesn't have pro-social values. He just thinks other things are important. It's hard to be a human being on this earth, especially an adult, but even children, and not say, well, there's certain things that Homo sapien values. And the distinction, so you don't say things like, in psychology, they have an array of values. The 3 prominent values are achievement, affiliation, and power. People don't have an absence of all 3 values. There's one of them which is more dominant usually or more important than the others. So the question is, especially in the Life Process program, we're asking people to identify and follow their values. So our claim is we're not telling people what their values should be. The example I always use in a public place is Uncle Oscar. And why did he quit smoking? When somebody says, look, Oscar's a sucker for the tobacco companies because he was like a political radical. And so then I say, well, obviously the solution to smoking and addiction is to be a communist, which is patently absurd. That happens to be Uncle Ozzy's value. And the question is, where in your array of values what's the most important? Is it your family? Is it your health? Is it God? Is it living a positive life? Is it your community? Is it your family tradition? Is it your racial tradition? So even people that we would not feel akin to, people like white supremacists, if you were in the business of trying to get them to behave in a more constructive way, you might say, well, how does that reflect on your views of your race that you're so concerned about? The fact that you're harming yourself or harming other people. So the fundamental distinction that I look for is pro-social values. For example, there's an interview on the internet I did with a bunch of young men, kids. There were 4 of them, and they were interviewing me for a video program they were doing. And I said to them, you know, what you're doing right here, and the topic was, what about gaming addiction? And I said, the most important thing that I look for in any young person is that they have some strong interest. Now, I'm not saying that you guys shouldn't do your English homework or, you know, learn long division and calculus, but the fact that you're here doing this video and organizing this program is a really positive sign, as long as you can do something. And when I say do something, I mean do something pro-social. That is something that is accepted and rewarded by society, and that you yourself believe in and can admire about yourself and that other people can admire, and that you're committed to that thing. I generally think people are going to be all right because they can build a structure as a young person around that. I know that's something you try to deal with your young clients, where you try and find their strong suit and build other activities and branches out of that one main thing. You don't really have to be exceptional or oriented towards more than one primary thing in life. You have to build a full life usually, but you only need to have a career and a life structure built around one strong thing. And as you know, I have some skills, but I built my life around thinking about addiction, how it's created, what it means, and how people can escape it.
I'm going to get inside baseball here. This will be an interesting way to peel the curtain open. And I think you and I are going to switch our perceived roles for a second. So our friend Maya Solovitz, who we like to both champion, we've mentioned her so often in our book as saying just the right thing, and then we like to pick on her because we say, hey, you didn't get all the way to the other side of that equation. Last year when I started doing marketing efforts for Life Process Program, or I guess you'd say like awareness for Life Process Program, the first thing I did was took the 12 values that you've talked about and that we wrote about in our book that can serve as a bulwark against addiction, and I turned them into these little slides and I shared them across different platforms. And Maya perceived that. She saw one and she perceived it as I was saying, if you value something else other than the thing I'm saying, then you're doing it wrong. Your values are bad. This value that I'm telling you, this is a good one. But I kind of think she knew that wasn't true. But anyway, she blasted me a little bit online, and I am known, at least publicly and professionally, for being fairly even keeled when it comes to disagreements. I can have them and still maintain. But I wrote her a nasty email saying, "Hey, what the hell? What are you did that, but you knew that wasn't what I was saying. So why do you do?" So may I give you the opportunity to talk about why, I guess the misconception was that we're saying there are good and bad values. You just said it's a personal preference. We can't tell you what to value, but at the same time, we can give some suggestions for things that you might value that would be pro-social. Can you just talk a little bit about that distinction for a minute?
Well, pro-social is the important part. It's both an ethical, perhaps a psychological. I mean, obviously, if somebody comes to us and say they value torturing animals
right.
or beating children, we're going to say, well, first of all, we'd have an obligation to report them to the police if they were hurting children or their own children. That's written into the code of psychologists and other professionals. So we are making a value judgment to the extent that we're saying it has to be something that contributes to your life, to other people's lives, or the community's life. And, you can choose among those. For example, you might be an artist who spends all your time on the guitar, and we might find that a little lonely. We might ask them whether they could branch out from that. But on the other hand, we're not going to tell them, well, you shouldn't be an artist. You shouldn't spend 12 hours a day playing guitar, because it's something constructive that contributes to your life and can contribute to the solar system's life. So we do have that we're not going to encourage, and we have a value judgment against destructive values. We're not going to say to somebody, I was watching a series on one of the cable channels, and there was a young woman who was very inexperienced, and in order to show her getting out of herself, they showed her destroying a bunch of very elaborately constructed snowmen with like a broom. And I turned the show off. I can't stand destructiveness. I'll never. And, with my grandkids or my own kids, I mean, the one thing I'll say is, with my youngest grandson, his mother is a nonstop industrial person. She was fixing, this must have been last year, the Christmas tree. And I say, your mother's a very constructive person. And sometimes you do destructive things. And he says, I don't know what you mean by destructive. And I said, what do you know what I mean by constructive? Look what your mother's doing. She's helping to build things and make things nice for you and herself. And I didn't say this, I let him think about it. And I say, destructive is tearing those things down. I'll never, my kids make fun of me. I can't watch on television, people litter or these ads for motorcycles or cars where they tear up the environment. I can't take it. I wouldn't say it makes me sick, but I'll turn off the television, like those motorcycle ads where they have a bunch of people gunning their motorcycles through this pristine valley. I'm not going to tolerate it. So I confess my fundamental value, and I think it underlies LPP and fighting addiction, is that we endorse positive values over the whole range of life that make some constructive contribution to your life, to other people's lives, or to the community's life.
Excellent. We have another question. This is from Twitter. Let me give you the context first. It's a person who listened to our series where we discussed each of the 8 modules of our program. So we had a podcast where we did little 20-minute segments, and we discussed each of the 8. And so one of them was talking about maturity. And so this person's question is a response to that, having heard all of those. He said, I'm thinking it would be useful for you to address the reality that some people are not able to have children. This is because we discussed that's, having a child in your life is sort of the number one natural way that people, grow to maturity quickly and without even really any conceived conscious effort. So it'd be useful for you to discuss the reality that some people are not able to have children and or can afford them in today's world. Otherwise, some of your content emphasis on maturity / purpose seems biased and incomplete. Kids aren't for everyone. Thoughts? And then he says, people can have completely meaningful and purposeful lives without children entering the picture. Many people have kids precisely because of a cultural bias, then get overwhelmed, then they get addicted to escape responsibilities they never felt suited for, or they feel like failures without kids. So I guess the question is, can't you find maturity without kids? And then there's a lot of.
And what's your answer to that?
A lot you might want to respond to. Well, yeah, of course. Of course. I mean,
that goes to that. We're not in the business. Neither of my daughters has children, but their brother has kids, and we're all, we celebrate Hanukkah with my son's children. But if you go back to Erik Erikson, he had 8 stages of life, and the last stage is generativity. It isn't parenthood. It's like, what mark have you made on the universe that's left some kind of an inkling of something positive?
Like legacy.
And one answer to that, of course, is young people. And you can be generative with young people by having nieces. A lot of people I know who don't have children, including my 2 daughters, don't have children. They have, and I'm not going to rule them out, they have nieces and nephews. They produce positive works that'll continue after them. They try to contribute to their environments and to society by promoting pro-social values. I mean, both of my daughters, one's in education psychology and one's in writing. They always, they'll never participate in spreading a negative value. So they're generating positivity. When my one daughter was kind of with a man, a fairly well-known actor who was extremely negative towards the waitress, my daughter wrote a piece saying, the guy's kind of a jerk. She's not going to allow negative values to be spread out there as though she tolerates or accepts them. So those are examples of generativity. And what can I tell you? Some of the people who were closest to me, my children, don't have children.
Right.
So I can hardly rule out people without children as being contributing members of society.
I think an overarching message that we could give people here is that when you're thinking about our content, even though it should be clear in the writing, we're not prescribing anything. There's like a basic element. One of the fundamentals is you have to live a good life. You kind of have to want to live life instead of checking out from it. Beyond that, these are all just, our best appraisal of good lives that have been lived so far and how you might channel it. So we're never giving a rule or saying that, you can or can't do something, or you should or shouldn't do something, but that you might want to gravitate toward one thing or another. And historically, other people have found success, happiness by doing whatever the example is.
you always want to explore people's parenting situation. That's sort of a first question. I think we're a little bit in line with Buddhism. I mean, Christianity lays down some heavy values, worshiping God and what would Jesus say. Buddhism is a little bit more like follow your own star, and I think that's the way we go. But we are life affirming. It is hard for us to double back. If we say addiction, as you point out, is an escape from life because you fear it or find it primarily negative. And so what we're saying is that's not even people who've had some extremely negative experiences. Aaron Ferguson spent a lot of his early life in a cult and in prison. We don't rule anybody out. You have to pay your dues, debt to society. We're not going to pardon people like Trump did, but we're going to say, well, okay, whatever you did in prison, if they've let you out, or even if they haven't let you out, if you're ready to pursue a positive contributory thing, if you're ready to embrace life and to look for something that you want to embark on in life, we can do this thing. If somebody wants to tell you they hate life and they hate their own life, that's a therapy of a different sort usually. And we can work with people on that, but we're not going to accept that. We're not going to sit there and say, well, okay, we're not going to encourage. We don't have a position on voluntary suicide, but we're not going to participate in encouraging people to have that kind of an outlook.
I won't go on about this, but there's a lady that I interviewed. Her name's Tessie Castillo. Are you familiar with her? She writes for Filter. She writes for a few outlets, but she wrote a book recently about death row inmates. She was there giving journalism classes to them. And while she was speaking with them, she was thinking like, okay, maybe I can give these people something not to, be suicidal over. And she found that so many of them wanted to make an impact somehow on more than anybody she's ever met. It's like, these are people who are recognized they have bad moral luck, or they're there for whatever reason. And they have really good aspects about them as people, despite some of the heinous things that they may have done. And so anyway, I encourage people to check out, her book is Crimson Letters, and I did a podcast with her. So you should check it out, because it's a really good way to think about, all right, if anybody shouldn't be able to have values and then turn their lives around, it should be death row inmates. But yet you find that there's a lot of human aspects and humans who want to do good in the world, even if they're in those situations.
They almost are more eager to find that.
Yeah.
I mean, human beings do seem to have, like plants, a life-affirming aspect to them. And another thing that you and I have said is, we don't encourage anybody to be addicted or to go to prison. But on the other hand, we recognize a certain existential strength or insight that people get from, a woman's just written a book. Is it Wilderness or Darkness, where she had a bad patch of things. Her husband got really ill, and bad things happen to people all the time. And she talked about enduring it and getting beyond that. In a way, we don't encourage people to have negative experiences. We certainly don't encourage them to be addicted or to commit crimes. But in a way, it broadens your palate. It makes you aware of how bad things can be for people. Like that woman did, the writer that you described. Is her name Tessa, did you say?
Tessie.
She discovered goodness in even people who've had the worst experiences, which shows how they've broadened their palates, and she broadened their palate from speaking to them. It's the same with The Good Place. It's if somebody had a completely positive, homogenized life, how interesting could that be? Or how interesting could we find them? They wouldn't have any idea about what the rest of us have dealt with and to some extent still deal with.
In fact, I'm going to link to, I interviewed one of the people who was on death row. So I'm going to link to that segment of the interview in the show notes. I'll move on to a question from LinkedIn message about moderation. And I don't know what the assumptions are that this person's making, but I guess the assumption is that we are in favor of moderation. And it's Michelle, and she says, oh, I like the idea of moderation. I'm reading from a slip. I like the idea of moderation, But every time I turn to, say, moderating from alcohol for a weekend because I have a task to do, I always want to drink twice as much on Monday. How can I? Well, the gist of it is, how can she incorporate a sort of a moderation thinking lifestyle with respect to alcohol so that she doesn't double down some other times? She seems like she's over focused on alcohol even while trying to moderate.
Well, we have coaches, and all of us. I mean, there was at one point there was this whole thing called moderate drinking and controlled drinking, and people developed a list of techniques for how to do that, and they exist. And we work with people. All of our coaches know. Let's say all of our coaches have some experience with the opposite of moderation,
Yeah.
and all of them, have gotten beyond that. So we believe it can be done. We have suggestions for it. But in a way, focusing on moderation versus abstinence misses the picture. I'm going to throw it back to you, Zach. I've heard you speak on this yourself. That it's not, the question isn't, should I have 2 drinks or 3 drinks or 5 drinks? The essential question that we help people to come to grips with is, you jump in, can you?
Yeah, can you find a balance? You figure out what is it, this is actually one of the questions we ask. What are the sensations that I'm seeking from drinking? And what other ways besides drinking do I get those sensations? And when it comes to drinking or whatever else, how can I fulfill those sensations in a way that I'm also attending to my responsibilities in a way that I'm going to have a basically good life? So it's not so much, do I moderate? Do I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 drinks? It's more like, am I building a life that is meaningful? And where does alcohol, is there a place that alcohol fits in there? If so, to what extent?
And another way of describing that therapeutically is, we're kind of existential therapists. I know you often work with people that way. You go, what are you pursuing in life? What is important to you? What are you attaching yourself to in life? And when that manifests itself, when you feel that in your guts, then it's rather than espousing one moderation technique or another. I won't have any cookies in my house, which is okay. It's not a bad idea. Or, I'll only stay in the bar for 40 minutes. That's my rule, whatever, rule you come up with. But those rules tend to be very personalized. We can't give people a rule like that. And they tend to be generated from people themselves when they say, I don't like the things that have occurred to me. I'm pursuing something more important now that requires them to be, pay attention, to be conscious most of the time. And, that's what's going to dictate my elimination of excess, however I choose and run around doing that. So the goal, first and foremost, is to find your attachment to life and then to work your way around that. Because if you ask people how they've moderated various things, it's almost like sex fantasies. They have the most bizarre ways they've done it, that you would say, well, that's ridiculous. Who could come up with a method like that? And the answer is, well, the person came up with that goofy method because it's their life. And, and one other aspect of what we do in the Life Process program is, what happens if, I've really got things mainly on track, but then I have a bad moment. And, bad moments are showing that good moments exist. So, for example, the thing that we think the craziest drug policy in the world was the one where they wouldn't let people who had a drug conviction get a scholarship, get federal money to go to college, which is like, we want people who used to be encumbered by drugs to get a positive interest. Yeah. Why would you say, we're not going to give you money to do something positive? And the worst thing we hate about AA is, if a person hasn't drunk in 6 years or 10 years or 20 years, and then they have one drink, they throw them back. We've discussed this in the case of, famous people. They throw them back to ground zero. We say, all right, maybe that wasn't a positive experience if you went too far and you yourself aren't happy about it, but let's get real. you've been doing well for a week or a month or 2 years. Let's give ourselves credit. We're not giving you an escape hatch, but let's add it all up. One day in 10 years is one day in 10 years. If everybody ruled their life and their definition of themselves by the worst moment they've had in the last 10 years, we'd all be suicidal. So that's totally the wrong way, focusing the telescope, turning the wrong way around.
So insofar as we ever talk about moderation, we're not talking about it as an exercise or a strategy. We're talking about it as a way to say, you may have heard that you have to stop whatever your object of your addiction is in order to get better or live better. And we're just saying, let's think first principles here. Let's not put drugs or alcohol or whatever it is in some other special weird category that says you have to stop it. Just like anything else in life, food, sex, relationships, sometimes you need to keep doing it. And the question's not, how do I stop? The question is, how do I incorporate this into some healthy way of living?
So you yourself had a monkey, a narcotics monkey, but I've heard you say, if you broke your leg or whatever, and they put you in the hospital and they give you narcotics, you say, thank God, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And, and some, I don't know what, and then, if they gave you a prescription to go home with, you would say, okay, I'll take it, like this, but I'm not going to do it informally anymore. That's off my lapel. That's off my menu. But that's an example of moderation, and you could ask anybody. It's hard to get the most abstinent person abstinent from anything and everything and say to them, you mean if you went to the hospital and you refused to let them give you a painkiller if they opened up your gut or something? Nobody says to that. So everybody's involved. Everybody likes moderation, everybody knows what moderation is. Everybody's had experiences where even during their worst excessive periods, they've been forced to moderate, They've been home with their parents or the family dinner or, at some place. Even the worst loss of control people moderate, even if they go out somewhere excessive. And so moderation, like addiction, is a universal experience.
Okay. Let me turn to, here's one from Facebook. Oh, you'll like this one. I already had plenty to say about it. I think you'll put it very well. This person said, this morning, I probably instinctively somehow used the term, this is Chuck, by the way. I probably instinctively somehow used the term addictive personality in a conversation, just colloquially. And I almost immediately started to wonder if there's any such thing. Anybody want to help me here? So Stanton Peele, you could just probably search Peele addictive personality and find plenty on it. But is there an addictive personality?
Well, there's certainly people who tend to do things excessively, and they often split it from one thing to another. I mean, there are people who, most research about alcohol-dependent people find that they've also smoked cigarettes. So those things do tend to travel in batches. There are people that we know who tend to attach themselves to things excessively, including people, for example. And, if you go back to, anxious attachment people who find relationships create anxiety, you'll see that they have that anxiety, they might have experienced it as children and they experience it as adults. Okay. But we're in the business of eliminating addiction. So Uncle Ozzy had something, and then he quit smoking, and he didn't become an alcoholic. People's overall anxiety levels tend to decrease as they get older. They tend to form more attachments. So we feel this, saying somebody has got a tendency to recreate addictive behaviors in one area or a lot of areas is worth being aware of, but that's not a thing. There's no addiction gene. There's no personality addiction gene. There's no childhood trauma that, means a person will never be able to escape it and form constructive relationships and avoid destructive addictions. So we believe there's such a, you can observe people being excessive, addictive in a number of areas, but that's one egg in the souffle. Um, those same people can improve and improve just as much. How do people who are addicted to cigarettes for, like Uncle Ozzy, 25 years or 50 years, if you say, well, oh, he has an addictive personality, and then when they quit, what then? They lost their addictive personality? No, they kind of redirected it. They calmed down. They made do. Maybe they came to grips. We talked about somebody coming to grips with not being a perfect father. Maybe as they got older, they came to grips with their own excessive tendencies. Maybe they made a joke about it. Oh man, it's hard to get rid of me. You know what I mean? If I'm, coming on too strong, tell me, because people have told me that in the past. That's an example of a constructive way of recognizing your personality and your past without letting it dictate your future, and certainly not your addictive future.
I like that you brought up genes, like, because you get into the weeds really quickly talking about personality, because you're naturally being reductionist, because you're not going to look at like say a baby's disposition in the world and say, all right, he's got the addictive kind of personality, so let's do, and there's no method that anyone's come up with, and I'm glad, because there's not going to be a method. The best you can do is look at people who have had some kind of addiction, and then you can say, what do they have in common? And then you can trace that backwards. It's like, what use is that really? Another problem I have with that is that it doesn't even shake out, even if you just eliminated some of the natural reasons why that doesn't work out. Excessive, there are different forms of excessive. I know people who like to be extreme in a lot of ways, but also, and maybe they formed addictions, but I also know, just from working with a lot of high school kids, that there are people who like to be extreme and risk taking, that are also, they value achievement. And so they're not going to let something like a slip or an addiction kind of behavior get in the way of achievement. So they either don't get addicted or they kick it. And I know some people who are really conscientious, that you might say that's the opposite side of the coin, who are so concerned about getting things just perfect or doing just perfect that bogs them down, and that they form some kind of a relationship with something that numbs them to their anxiety about it. So what are you going to do? You got to just, we all kind of follow the same plan. Personality has only as much to do with it as you want it to, I guess, on an individual level.
Well, we're certainly, yes, the most successful novelist possibly in our lifetime is Stephen King. And he has this description about how his wife went through his trash can, and it was filled with pill bottles and empty alcohol bottles, and whatever he's stuffing his nose with, and now he maybe works too much. You know what I mean? He keeps turning out best-selling novels and movies. So, he might have been a little excessive for a time there, and but excessiveness, in the service of something positive. And of course, what you're pointing out is you never, ever, ever want to give anybody, but certainly a young person, a label that they're going to try and live up to.
Right.
And that, people point out that one distinctive personality distinction with children is that some are shyer than others. That seems, but first of all, those differences are erased often by the time they're adolescents or the time they're adults. And then the fact that somebody's more outgoing or shyer than another person, so what? What's that translate into? Obviously you want to follow what you're best at or what is truest of you. You're probably not going to be a salesman if you're shy. Well, maybe I wouldn't even rule that out. Like you're not going to be, an athlete if you're not physically adept. But, whatever your shtick is, whatever your strong suit is, can always be layered into a positive life. Nothing should ever be said either pejorative about a person or, so that they're never allowed to get out of that lane. Oh, I know that you don't like to talk to people, so, well, you probably won't want to join a group, or you probably won't get married or have a relationship. None of those kinds of statements, makes sense. I asked the most obvious question to a person I know who's really strongly indebted to genetic theories of addiction. And this is sort of what you were saying. I said, well, how does that help somebody? To say, oh, you got a gene for addiction. And it was as though she had never thought about that. I said, how is that therapeutic? And what we're about, it's both the truth of observing people change, and what we're about is helping people to redeal their deck of cards, their hand of cards that produce the best hand for themselves in proceeding in life.
Got one more question for you. This is an email. I think that you pronounce the name Raj, R-A-J. So
sounds right.
Yeah. This is, I think, asking for tactical kind of advice. It says, I overeat. Oh, and I know that I need a good new routine, but I really don't know where to start. Any suggestions?
Well, I know that we have coaches who are, I know Ann deals often with eating disorders and overweight. Obviously it's a combination of things. We began by saying, well, how do you moderate? There's certain rules that people kind of know about. Don't keep a lot of sweets around the house. Try and eat at home as much as often. And I'm hardly an expert on this. I'm just saying things that are obvious. Try to limit your eating to meals. Everybody knows these things. And then we can switch to exercise. Everybody knows that being physically active is good. And, whenever you read anything about this, they always say, physical activity can just be, walking around the block. Let's not go crazy. Maybe you should join a gym. Can't join a gym right now. But just being physically active, a half hour a day is a really positive kind of thing. That's on the one hand, but you and I also emphasize at the other end, well, what are your larger values in life and your larger goals? Will it be helpful to you to be in control of your weight, to form intimate relationship? Will it be helpful to you? Do you want to be in control of your weight, to be a parent? I know an actual famous, I won't use his name, psychologist who used to be grossly overweight. And this is his story. I mean, he's a behaviorist. He's well known.
Still alive?
He's well known.
Is he still alive? Still around?
Yes, he's still he's pretty well known in the field. He was pushing his young son in his supermarket, and he was super overweight, and he fell over, and he could barely get up, and he just had one of those moments. He said, well, I couldn't even help my son if he was, in that little thing they have the kids sit in. And I just realized that I just had to lose weight. And then people say, well, how do you produce a moment like that? We're getting back to what's important to you in your life. I mean, the man was a smart man. He could have written a list of things. By the way, he's very trim now. He could have written a list of things about what he needed to do to lose weight, but he needed a focus in life, a principle, something that was important to him. So, one of the reasons people quit addictions like smoking and weight is, when they get pretty sick, which is, the long way around. But the fact that happens shows you that it's there already and that you might want to cook it up. I know people who say they quit smoking when their father died of cancer. You can generalize the experiences of looking at other people. So, there are no secrets that most people aren't aware of to losing weight. You can always sign up, for a dietary reminder. It's helpful to hang around people who've lost weight. I know another woman, you know her as well as I do, whose blood pressure just shot up. She's in her 40s and, it's scary. So she just started walking to work every day. She's like a role model to me now. I'm older than her, so, I may not have had that problem to the extent she did. It was dangerous for her. And, but she came to an awareness of something, and she connected it up to wanting to live and to engaging in positive behaviors. So, your friend can join a group or a mailing list. There are all kinds of things on the internet. And the person who wrote in should think, well, what are the positive things in life that I'm most connected to? How does being healthy, controlling my weight and my blood pressure and related diabetes things tie into that? And follow your star. That'll help you focus on what it is that you need to do to moderate.
So kind of, we've seen that people kind of figure it out on their own once things get dire enough. But what you're saying, you don't have to wait for them to get dire. You can map this out and reverse engineer what's important to you. What is something you might lose, if you continue whatever the behavior is, and what's something that could be gained if you change it, and reverse engineer it that way to say, people kind of have the answers already.
They have the answers already. I was involved in a case where a man sued a tobacco company for having lung cancer, which he died of. But as often happened in the case, he had actually quit smoking 12 years before. He was, he died in his 70s, and he quit smoking 12 years before, and he smoked since he was a young teenager. And the experts said, well, he had a nicotine dependent, blah, 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 blah. This is how he quit smoking. He had a heart attack in his early 60s. And this is in the case materials about how addiction and smoking addiction is irremediable. And when he woke up from, the medical coma, he said to his daughter, would you get me a cigarette, honey? And she said, Dad, if you smoke, I'm never going to talk to you again. And he quit. Put that in an MRI, you know what I mean? Put that in a brain scan. And so, you might say, well, he had to have a heart attack first. His daughter had to threaten never to leave him again. But that's not the question. The question is, was his dependence on smoking insurmountable? And the answer is no. He quit. And then, this made him quit, but it's all packed in him. His love. I mean, he could have said, do I really want to kill myself and lose, my daughter who I love so much? You can work that backwards in your mind. And we try to help people do that to avoid, Oscar didn't get a heart attack. He got it, 25 years, he lived to be over 90, half a century before that.
Well, thank you, Stanton, for your time. And thanks, people, for writing in. We already have an overflow. So people have already written in that we can capture next week. So I like that. I see more and more questions every week. It's good that we're doing it, and you seem to be providing a lot of help. And
I love bouncing them back and forth with you. And I love the way you have a real hands-on feeling for talking with people. You try to break the abstract down to doable principles, which is what we try to do in the Life Process program. You have a good gift for that. So, I've been formulating these things for centuries. I like your helping to segue it into human experience.
Make a good team. And so we'll see everybody next week. Thanks, Stanton.
Pleasure. Bye.